y'all got something really fancy now. I am so glad to see all of you. I've missed you, and it is so good to come back and see everybody whenever we get a chance. Thank you for the invitation. I had the biggest surprise just a few minutes ago. I saw Eddie and Sherry and Gary come up, and they're part of the reason why I'm a preacher today. I went out to Visalia, California, at where they were, and Jean and Carolyn Mullins, Sherry's mom, she was amazing, and he was one of my elders, and I just can't tell you enough about them because I wasn't a Bible major when I went out there to work, and I went back to Free Hardeman, a Bible major, because of them. So my year of music went by the wayside, and I almost had to start all over. Thank you. No, I am really blessed to be a preacher, and I don't know what else to do. I love it so much. I'm a little heavier than I was back then. If you want to see that picture, they've got one. So, I tell you what, 2 Timothy is a really neat letter or epistle. It was written around, I think, in Rome around AD 67. And what was really neat about it is that Paul gives us a lot of background of who he is and what he had to go through in this epistle. Luke was by his side, and he was missing some of his people, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But Paul wrote this letter, and to my knowledge, I think it's the last letter he wrote before he was martyred. Timothy was a very special young man to him, and it's really neat when you look at the relationship that they had. It was a mentor relationship where he was older, and he had gone the route, and he was trying to break in this young preacher. And it's so neat to see that, because I kind of went through that. I had two, I guess you could call them my mentors. They were much more than that word to me. But Paul Cantrell and also Owen Albright. Owen Albright, I did a lot of campaigns northeast, southeast, and we went all over the place where we door knocked and we set up Bible studies, and it was very enjoyable. But Owen was the kind of person that he was never married, and he just went everywhere, even to Europe and several places, South America. And so I would get letters from both of them. And it felt like that Paul-Timothy relationship. And I'm very thankful I had them. I really miss them. They've gone on, but their work continues to go on in many different fashions. Some of the things that you're going to see in 2 Timothy is Paul is given information, and he says, look, I have suffered. I've gone through a lot for a preacher, but it's great. I wouldn't do anything else, basically, as he continues to go through that. Some of the things he says to Timothy, that suffering is a part of Christianity. And I thought that was interesting. That's found in 2 Timothy 1:8. Also, if you look at chapter 2, 3, at 3:12 and 4:5, he mentions it in every chapter. So it must have been really important for him. He reminds the young Timothy to endure that suffering and to stay faithful in all of it, to be in season and out of season, always preach the word. And as Christians around the world, we can apply it today, face persecution. We really don't know what some people have had to go through just to be a Christian. And it's amazing to me, sometimes whenever we think we've been persecuted, it's good for us to hear, others who have gone through things and they give you courage and they encourage you to do even better. Whenever you listen to their story and you think, wow, they made it through that, man, I can't even compare to that. And so whenever you look at the real world and our suffering or even persecution, it's not anywhere close to what Paul saw in his time. Just to be a Christian could get you killed, and it did, and that's what ended up killing him. He was in a Roman prison there, and that's what ended up being the demise. But he wasn't bitter about it. As a matter of fact, he seemed kind of optimistic. Whenever you read he says, "I've fought the fight. I've run the race." As Christians, we need to be able to identify with Paul because he preached about the living Savior, Jesus. And that was his main mission everywhere he went. And he was concerned about the church. He with all of his epistles and letters that he wrote, all of them showed how much he loved the church. And as we look at his life and his sufferings, it gives us courage and gives us a whole different insight on how to be a good Christian. And an especially poignant place is Paul repeated words about those who had forsaken him. He was really hurt. There was some people that just left him and forsook him, and some of those folks was like Demas and Titus and Onesimus, and of course we look at some of that loneliness, but he also had Luke that was with him during the time of this writing, which you remember that Luke was a physician, but he also was a good friend to Paul, and he was there with him to the end. Suffering of a Christian, especially as a Christian leader, includes the suffering of loneliness, despite faithfulness. You might think that someone who is like Paul, that he was, loved by everyone, and he went to so many places, but he died lonely. And incidentally, that happens to a lot of preachers. They feel isolated and lonely. And it's really because they just haven't had the opportunity to really make real relationships. And for me, I can't tell you how many relationships I am blessed with, and the works that I've been in, especially here, are so rewarding because of those relationships. And I'm not in prison somewhere having to write a letter to you. I get to pop in every now and then, say hello, and give each one of you a hug. But he was really, really wanting Timothy to stay with the truth and stay with the doctrine. Throughout 2 Timothy, Paul refers to the truth, and you'll see it in 2 Timothy chapter 5, 15 and 18. And then he on down in 25, and then he repeats it in chapter 3 and 4. But he charges Timothy to guard the deposit. Guard the deposit that he has entrusted in him. He believed in Timothy. He looked upon him, and he had good courage that the church was going to continue to move on. And so as he did that, and as he gave the opportunity to Timothy, we know how important it is that the church is preserved. I can't tell you how many wonderful congregations that I've known through the years, they've drifted away or their doors are shut, and it breaks my heart. It really breaks my heart to think that, through the years, they become extinct or they've decided to change their doctrine. Paul wanted Timothy to stay on point. He wanted him to stay true to the Word. And folks, that rings true for us today. We cannot leave the truth. We cannot leave the Bible. The Bible needs to be our God always, and it needs to be our instruction book in our families. And as we continue to grow, it becomes that meat that is filled in our lives, and it becomes rich. And what's amazing about it is every time I've opened the Bible, there is something that I learned. Think about this just a second. God's Word is living and abiding. And if that doesn't show you how the Word is constantly changing us and molding us into what God wants us to be if we follow it. He tells Timothy that you'll need to correct some people. And he gives him some passages here that we have. 2 Timothy 2, 24 through 25. He must reprove, rebuke, and exhort with complete patience. I don't know about you, but sometimes patience is a learned thing for me. It's something that, when I was younger, I was really impatient, and as I've grown, I think I was pretty impatient when I was here. Miss Helen could attest to that. But as I've aged and as I've come to know more and more about the Word, the more that I realize that God's in charge. We're living in some bad times as far as the trajectory shows in our nation, because there's so many things that are hidden morally, and so many things at one time. And it's really sad when we think about it that, a guy is not a guy, but he's a girl, and you go into the girls' dressing room. Whoever thought that would happen? And so for things like that, I don't have patience for. But I do have patience with people in trying to work with things. So the themes that we see here are not only relevant to Timothy, but they're also relevant to us today as we seek to live out our faith in this challenging world. In the first place on your outline, you will find the call to faithfulness. Do y'all have the outline? Y'all don't, do you? Because it's in my car. I printed it out. It's real pretty too, and it's yellow. Totally forgot it. Just now I remembered it. Well, it would have been in your outline. And we see in the first chapter, first part of it, verses 1 through 7, Paul begins with a heartfelt greeting. He greets the church, just like what we would do. We would, if we were in a letter setting, most of the time, if you're writing someone, you're going to greet them, and you're going to say, "I hope you're doing well," blah blah blah, and you're going to catch them up on some things. And that's, if you look at these epistles, that's exactly what it is. Is that he is communicating to these churches, and as he does that, he's updating them, but he's also teaching them and encouraging them. He didn't forget these congregations, and that's what's so amazing about Paul. He encourages Timothy to fan the flame. Well, we need to be on fire for the Lord, right? As a matter of fact, when we talk about Jesus and the 7 churches of Asia, he goes to Laodicea and he says, "I wish you were either hot or cold, but you're lukewarm, and I spew you out of my mouth." Jesus wanted the churches to be on fire. Incidentally, that transcends to today. We need to be on fire for souls. There's so many souls that need the truth. They need to have what we have. And we need to share it with so many others. And it seems like it stays within our doors way too much. He reminds them that God has given us the spirit of fear. He has not given us the spirit of fear, but the power of love and self-discipline, verse 7. In verses 8 through 12, Paul urges Timothy not to be ashamed of the gospel, not to be ashamed to be a Christian. Now, you think about this just for a second. Paul wasn't ever ashamed of being a Christian. He was the man who, at first, were dragging Christians out of their homes. He was persecuting, he was crucifying Christians. But now here he is. He's a Christian. And he knows his life is in danger, and he knows Timothy's life will be in danger. But he tells him to keep fanning the flame. Because Christianity was so contagious. So many people were learning the way, as it's called through the scriptures, the church. And so in verse 8 through 12, we see instead that Timothy is called to join in the suffering with Paul for the gospel's sake and the power of God. Paul shares his own example over and over of his suffering and emphasizes the eternal purpose and the grace that is found in Christ Jesus. In verses 13 through 18 in chapter 1, Paul instructs Timothy to hold on to the pattern, of sound doctrine, who sought out Paul and refreshed him with those who deserted him. You got to understand, during this time, they didn't have the Bible like you and I have in our hands. They didn't have the Word. The Word had not been written completely yet. It was still in process. So it took these preachers to go to teach and to give this message to these people. And they would hear him, or they would hear Timothy, and they would be amazed with what they could do and what they could say, and what it was just amazing to them. And I feel like that back in that day, they probably would have been looked at as either just out of their mind, or they were just basically anointed by God. And certainly we know that they were a blessing to these congregations, and so many people did become Christians. And they remained Christians, even though they were under persecution. They had to go in places to hide, to worship. At times, they had to meet in their own houses. And they didn't have a church building like what we have today. Things were so different back then. But Paul is encouraging him to fan the flame. Keep that church going. Keep the church going, Timothy. And so he highlights the importance of avoiding even godless chatter. I think this is really neat. And that he remain committed to the faith. We got so much to talk about the scriptures that we really don't have time for wives' tales or things that, that's really not of any substance. That the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Word, it has all power. And when we share that, that is a message of hope for those folks. We see in verses 20 through 26 how it's a metaphor of a clean vessel, emphasizing the need of purity. And to not only to be pure, but to be ready in season and out of season to teach the truth. He provides instructions for dealing with opponents gently. He hoped that the people that he met and loved and cared for, he wanted them to feel encouraged with knowing that he cares for them. He loves, and he's thinking about them in this prison. Then we also see where Paul reminds Timothy, and we think about this just for a moment, that he reminds us Jesus Christ was raised from the dead. And who raised him? It was God. And so this message was amazing, and the people that he was always speaking to in letters that he wrote, they knew about the resurrection. They were first-hand people who saw this. And it was a trustworthy saying about the enduring Christ, and that how we need to endure with him. Down in chapter 3, the reality of persecution. We see in verses 1 through 9 that Paul describes the difficulties of the last days. Now, I have a question for you. Are we in the last days? We have been all of our lives. As a matter of fact, if you go all the way back, years, centuries, and even thousands, we've been in the last times, the last days. And what I think is amazing is this, is that there is no timeline in heaven. And so God he's not bound by this like we are. And we see in the scriptures that a year is as a day, what is it? A year is as a, finish it. I've drew a blank. Do what? Yeah, a day is like 1,000 years. It's like a day to him. Our 1,000 years would be like a day, correct? I think that's right. You know, whenever you get older, you get to forgetting things. But and as he shares the truth to these churches, he really lays out the difficulties that they are going to be going through also. And what would happen. You remember Nero was a great persecutor of Christians. And we know in the day when the Romans came into power, the Christians were greatly dispersed and greatly abused, hurt. And what's amazing to me is that these Christians remain Christians even after what they went through. We go through heartaches sometimes. And it's real easy for us to maybe want to blame someone. And God usually is the one that gets the blame. God, why did you allow this to happen or that to happen? And I see a lot of people in counseling. Since I've seen y'all last, I finished my master's in counseling. And one of the things that I see over and over is that people have misplaced anger. People have misplaced anger. And whenever they come to me and need counseling, a lot of times what they're trying to do is get past that anger. Well, these folks back here, we don't see so much of that. I think as a church today, we need to be encouragers because we are in the last days, and we have been all these years. And so we need to exhibit the truth, and we need to exhibit godly behavior. When we go and look on in that verses 1 through 9, he warns Timothy to have nothing to do with discerners, those people who were doubters. He didn't want people that had ungodly behavior poisoning the church. Now, it isn't that Paul didn't care about their soul, because I think he did. But part of the reason why he didn't want them in there is that he was afraid that it would tear the church down so bad that it would be barely recognizable. And I think we can understand that, can't we? We can understand that it's really important that we have unity in the truth. And if there were problems in the church during this time, Paul, he would tell you need to deal with it. If you don't believe me, go over to the 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Well, I tell you what, there were some things that were going on in the church. A young man was living with his father's wife, and yet they were prominent members of a church. And he says, this ought not be. We need to keep the purity in the church. In verses 10 through 13, Paul, again, he shares with his own example of perseverance. Amidst persecution, he's encouraging the young Timothy to follow his teaching in conduct, purpose, faith, patience, love. But you still will be persecuted. You can do all these wonderful things, Timothy, and understand you're still going to be persecuted no matter how much you do for the Lord. People hate you because they hated Christ. And it's the same today. There are going to be people who hate us just because we are Christians. We follow Christ. And Jesus tells us very plainly, they're going to hate you because of me. And sure enough, it was fulfilled. When Paul offers this advice to the young Timothy, he reminds him again to live a godly life. Let's pause a second. Let's think about this godly life. What is godly life? Well, we need to be more like God. Godliness means that we're in the same character as Jesus, and the same character as God. And whenever I think about the word Christian, we bear Christ's name wherever we go and whomever we see or talk to. I'm often reminded in the grocery store aisle, or Lowe's is where I like to go. In those places, there's so many people that could really use a lift, an encouraging word, and an invitation. I remember Andy, by the way, said hello to everybody. You remember he was from Switzerland. He was our exchange student. And he loves this church. He misses the singing so much. And I gave him the address to listen to you all, so I think he does that. But he reminded me when we were in Switzerland in November about Robin going through the grocery store making everybody laugh. And how he had a special way of making contact with people. And that's really where we need to do. We need to have a spark in our step. Instead of having a ho-hum attitude, we've got hope. We've got the truth. We've got the ability to know who Jesus is through his word. We've got the greatest message to ever share. And so Paul is wanting to make sure that Timothy keeps that going. Not only in him, but also the people that Timothy comes in contact with. And when we get to chapter 4, here it is. Preach the word. Preach the word. Verses 1 through 5, Paul charges Timothy to preach the word in every season, to correct, to rebuke, and to encourage with great patience and careful instruction. He warns of a time when people will turn away from sound doctrine, and they will go with fables. They'll believe the fables quicker than they will the truth. Did he have it right? We can apply that today. How many times do you find people wanting to go outside of what God has given us? Go outside of the scriptures. You know, I've talked to people over the years, and it really hurts sometimes whenever you hear these words. You can give me a stack of Bibles, but I'm going to worship God the way I want to, and He's going to have to accept that. Well, I sometimes feel like I need to step back because I don't want that lightning to hit me. And that's a joke. But it's true. You know, when you think about the people, that's really what they're thinking. He's just going to have to accept what I have. He's going to have to accept me for who I am. You hear that a lot, right? But He doesn't have to accept anyone. That's just the thing that we need to understand. But He sent His Son. God so loved the world that He sent His only begotten Son. He sent Jesus down here to save our souls. He made a way for us to be forgiven of our sins. And so Timothy was going to be challenged. Sometimes people are going to love what you have to say. And then there's going to be times when people have itching ears. They want you to tell them what they want to hear. But as you well know, the Bible doesn't always tell us what we want to hear. The Bible tells us what we need to hear. What we need to characterize ourselves and to make sure that our lives are in accordance to God. And this foolishness of God having to accept me for who I am, God does look at you and He loves you for who you are. But He wants you to profess godliness. He wants you to live in Him. There's a man that I studied with this morning, and he said, I've been thinking about becoming a Christian for so long. And he says, my kids are getting older, and I need to set an example. Well, this is kind of what Paul is doing right here. He's setting an example for Timothy so that he will know the truth. And we know if you know the truth shall make you what? Free. Paul reflects in verses 6 through 8 on his imminent departure, expressing the confidence in having food for fodder, and as he tells him to fight the good fight, finish the race, keep the faith. These are the things he says he's done, and we have proof of it. He provides these wonderful opportunities for Timothy to know and to continue to have the crown of righteousness like he's about to get that crown of righteousness. And Paul wasn't ho-hum about death. He was looking forward to it. He was looking forward to the time. Not that he had a suicide mission. It wasn't that he just wanted to die. It was the fact that he felt like he had run the race. He did what he needed to do Now it's time to pass the baton and to entrust it into this young Timothy. That's amazing. Verses 6 through 8, I think to my preaching has been some of my greatest passages to come back to and to refer to, because it reminds me what I need to be doing. And I want to be like Paul. I want to run the race. I want to win that race. Winning, that meaning that I have that crown of righteousness. And the thing of it is, we all can be winners. We can all run that race with endurance. But we need each other. We need to encourage one another. We need to teach one another. What did they say? Iron sharpens iron. Well, we need to sharpen each other. So many times we forget how important a word is, even in our daily talks and what we do. In verses 9 through 18, Paul provides personal instruction and acknowledgments, highlighting the faithfulness of the Lord to deliver him from every evil attack. Verses 19 through 22, it's your conclusion. Paul concludes with a final greeting and benediction. And it is really cool how he does this, is because he's saying, yeah, if you see this person, you tell them this. And it's kind of like, well, if you see Aunt Susie, make sure you tell her I love her and say hello. That's the type of atmosphere, or the type of way that Paul is writing here. He loves these people and these congregations where Timothy's going. And it's just like seeing the Aguirres when I came in here. I haven't forgotten them. They've been encouragers for 32 years. That's how many years I've known you. 32 years. Finally, and I know, is that the final bell? Let's remember the key points. Faithfulness in the midst of trials. Endure your ministry. Be aware of persecution and steadfastness in the faith. Have a faith that is unwavering to commitment, and just like Timothy, to preach the word. We're all ministers of the gospel. We need to share it. It's a call to action to rekindle the gift of faith in our lives, to commit to studying and living by sound teaching, and to embrace the challenges of ministry with endurance. Thank you so much. Y'all been so kind.